Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Welcome, ladies, from all over the world. We've got Nyla, Lama, and Salma. Both Lama and Salma are calling in from the UK, and Nyla from California, USA. Thank you so much for being with us today. And to our audience, we'll be having a discussion about grief. And everybody sitting here in this space today has, of course, had some grief experience and maybe currently still going through grief or maybe having found a way through that. And we'd love to hear more about your insights, your experiences, and also how you have managed it and where your relationship with grief as it stands today. And I would, of course, first of all, like to hear who you all are. So we'll start with Nailah.
Yes. Hello, everyone. I am a writer and lawyer based in Oakland, California. I have been writing about love and marriage for the last almost 4 years now. It's particularly about the Muslim community and how people are finding love and marriage, and then now in the wake of my divorce. Processing how people are, separating and dealing with the difficulties that come with that.
Thank you. Lama?
Hi, assalamu alaikum. So yes, I'm Lama and I'm based in the UK, in Oxfordshire. I'm a nurse by background, and alhamdulillah, I have two daughters. I'm a divorcee, so I've been divorced for about coming up to about 6 or 7 years. And I also lost my mother, coming up to 9 years. So that's my kind of experiences with grief.
Okay, rahimahullah. And so sorry to hear about that. And Salma?
Assalamu alaikum everyone. My name is Salma and my background is actually as an IT consultant. So 30 odd years as an IT consultant here in London, UK. I retrained as a coach during lockdown, mainly because I wanted, and then I specialized in supporting women in the Asian community through divorce and post-divorce. Largely off the back of my own experience. I was divorced approximately, it's been about 10, 11 years now. And I found at that time, although I had all the support in terms of, I was in therapy for many years, I always felt that there was a gap in the market in terms of really understanding the cultural and religious impact. And I would spend a huge amount of time explaining to my therapist um, things that were important to me that she didn't necessarily have an understanding of. And that's really where I thought, well, actually, if I want to help people in that area, I really want to work closely with women that understand me and I understand exactly the positions and the restrictions and the belief systems that we have when it comes to marriage, divorce, and culture and family and all of these things that are all a part of everyday life.
Okay, yes, so much needed for sure. So I'd like to go into more detail about what has this grief experience been like for you? And Nyla, could you go ahead?
Yeah, I'm kind of new to grief. Like, alhamdulillah, I haven't had any deaths in the family that like really big deaths that like caused me to experience grief. But it was really just with my divorce, 1 year ago, that has caused me to understand the different layers of grief and how it, impacts your mental health, your physical health, your spiritual health, and for me, I'd recognize like a grief of obviously the marriage, number one, but also the person that I was before I got married, someone who was maybe a little bit more naive, like a little bit more innocent when it comes to like the aspirational points of marriage, and thinking that like when you say that, that you will marry someone, that you love them forever, that you're gonna like stay in that position, that frame of mind. But that's not the reality. And so that like understanding, like grieving myself, my former self, which was just more, I guess just more innocent, and trying to find a new self that's not someone that's closed off, but someone that is going to protect herself in the future and be a little bit more street smart, I guess, in the selection process for next time around. And with the grief that I've been dealing with, also, it's obviously like grieving the future as well as the past. I don't have any children, so this idea that like 2024 was the year I was going to get pregnant, that had to go into the waste bin. And thinking of what's my next few years going to look like if it's not going to be in the role of a mother, in that way with him. So just yeah, a loss of myself, of the past marriage, and of the future, has all been part of my mourning process.
And how has this grief process shaped you in a certain way?
It shaped me. Yeah, I think I'm still figuring it out, how to the extent to which it impacted me. I'm thinking like a lot closer about the relationships that I have, even with friends, because it changed your dynamic with people. Like when for those that did come to my support and like helping me through this process, now I know to like who's really going to be there for me, and like as life goes on, or those that didn't really answer the call, like that's a change too, and how I'm going to approach those relationships. My trust with people definitely has changed, and having definitely a new outlook with how my faith is going to be the thing that gets me through the difficult times in life. A renewal of that. I've like always been strong with my faith, but for sure this difficult moment has brought me closer, in terms of, if it's a really dark day, it's like, this is just a dunya day, like this is not forever. Realizing what's really important is not the connections that we have on this earth, but it's with our Lord, and the aspirations that we have for the next life. That's really gonna help me to get through the dark days. And people ask a lot, like, how are you doing? How's it going? And I'm like, good days, bad days. Because some days it's like you wake up and you feel great, and you see the sunshine, and like you have so much hope, and so many goals set out for the day, for the week. But then sometimes you feel the tidal wave, and it just sucks you in, and you remember everything that you lost, or you think that you lost. And that I've learned in the last year that that's the grief process. It comes out of nowhere and it hits you, and you can't really switch a button and feel better. You have to let it go through you, and it does pass. It does definitely pass. And learning that to be okay with not being okay is really important for me going forward.
Yes, my non-violent communication coach told me that often when you feel any emotion, and if you just sit with it for a bit, you just be present with it and feel it, then it will flow through you. It'll just pass like a wave. So that sounds something what you mean. Lama, how about you?
Yeah, yeah, I really resonate with pretty much everything that Nyla said. SubhanAllah, like it's a very personal experience, grief, and I think I, in some ways, have had space to be able to compare, if that's the right word to use, between the loss of my mum and through the divorce, so the loss of a spouse through divorce, and kind of it's also that loss of um that family that I thought I would have. Alhamdulillah, I do have children, but it's also that then I grew up always, that was my dream to always just have a family and, be the, you know, family units and things like that. And I think I resonate a lot with what Nyla was saying, in the sense of, I think for me particularly, I was quite naive going into the marriage. I was quite young. I didn't really understand the purpose of marriage, and really the roles and the responsibilities of um, each role within the marriage, but also kind of the yeah, that kind of what's the purpose of marriage, right? And actually it's not just like all lovey-dovey, like things, but also choosing the right partner as well, like for to be a father for your children. And subhanallah, like that's something that I've really had to come to terms with, in the sense of actually it might not, I'm having to co-parent with someone that we don't see eye to eye. So alhamdulillah for that. But also the sense of the loss for my mother, I think that's something that has been really challenging, and to this day is a real challenge. It's, as I said, it's going to be 9 years in December that my mother died. May Allah have mercy on her. And it's not easy. Like we were friends. We'd go out together. Alhamdulillah, she met my daughters, but yeah, it's that real loss of a friend as well as a mother. And I struggle. Like this week has been really hard, actually, in the sense of I've just wanted to be with her. And alhamdulillah, like this, it's a pain, a real physical pain that I feel with the grief when I think about my mother. And um in the sense of it can be quite debilitating, actually. And grief can really just, for me, can bring me very like inwards. I can shut off to the outside. I can get on with my day, absolutely, but and do what I have to do, but actually internally can be real like pain. But alhamdulillah, this is a test, and like Nyla was saying, this is dunya. And it's subhanAllah, like for me, I've really been reframing it in the sense of like this is I inshallah know my mum, may Allah have mercy on her, is inshallah waiting for me, and that's my aim, to get there, right, and to be with her. And that's my purpose now in this life. And I think Allah tests us with things that feel extremely painful and can be like heartbreaking, but because he knows that he's trying to remind us of actually what this dunya is about. Like it's really not all like fun and getting, actually we don't want to be um like oblivious to that, do we, as Muslims? Like alhamdulillah, we want to aim for that, for the akhirah, inshallah. Um yeah.
Thank you for sharing. I definitely am coming back to both of you about how you handle that grief. I'll first I want to hear from Salma, please, about your journey with grief.
I think like yeah, everything you two have said, like I felt over the last 10 years or so, different like ways. And I think the thing that struck me about grief and trying to navigate the grief journey was I, every time you make progress, and I know you mentioned this, Nyla, that you wake up some days and, life feels good. And then suddenly out of nowhere, an emotion gets triggered or a memory comes back or a conversation comes back. And suddenly you feel as if you're back in the midst of the grief. And it's almost like, but why am I going backwards? I'm making progress. And then suddenly you find yourself back in it. And I think that for me was the hardest aspect of grief. And I think more importantly, for the first maybe year to 18 months, I actually didn't give myself permission to grieve. I had come out of quite an abusive, mentally abusive relationship. I had made that decision to leave. So when I finally did leave and, filed for divorce, a lot of the blame came on me, especially from my ex-husband. His sort of rhetoric was that I had been the one that had made that decision. And I owned that decision because I had made that decision. But equally, once a divorce was over and I was supposed to be grieving, because regardless of who's made that decision, you're still in a huge amount of pain. Somebody had to make that decision. And so for me, there was a lot of internal conflict because it was like, but this is what you wanted. So why are you now so sad? Why are you so upset? And I think it took me a while to understand that actually it wasn't what I wanted. It was what I needed at that time to leave that marriage. But at no point in entering the marriage did I want to entertain the idea that we would not be together for the foreseeable future. So I think for the first almost 18 months, I didn't give myself permission to grieve because I was angry at myself for being sad. And I think once you allow yourself that permission, then you can start onto the road of recovery by allowing yourself to feel sad and thinking, well, actually, I still have, my dreams were still shattered. My, goals have still had to be put on hold, and I've had to re-evaluate where I am at this moment in time. So I do have the right to grieve, regardless of the fact that I made that decision to leave the marriage.
And you left the marriage because you were offered no other choice. It was the only thing that you
Yes,
could do. Is that
yes. It
exactly?
was a choice for me, actually. I think it was the impact that it was having on my children and the long-term impact. I hadn't grown up in an environment where there was a lot of conflict. I didn't really know how to handle conflict. My idea of handling conflict was to run and hide and not really be able to like stand up for myself. And when I saw the impact of that on my children, it wasn't really the kind of household that I wanted. I wasn't able to protect my children from that conflict because it was always there. And I think for me, maybe if I hadn't had children at that time, I may well have stayed in the marriage longer. But when you see the impact on your children, well, at least when I did, for me, there was more of an urgency to do something to protect them and take them out of that environment so that they could live in an environment where they weren't scared and they weren't being in, like feeling unsafe. Because I think that's so important for all of us, but more so for children who don't actually understand what's going on.
100%. Okay. Thank you. Nyla, so when you feel this grief coming on like this wave, this dark cloud, as you say, every morning is different, or it could be a totally unassuming moment when it just pops up and something happens and it triggers you. It's a memory, something that somebody said, or somebody that you bump into. Anything can just bring this wave of grief. How do you handle that? How have you handled it? And what do you feel has worked and has been constructive, and what has been actually the opposite?
Yeah, I number one have been focused on like creative energy to get out the sadness. So I did start a blog a few months after I got divorced, beginning of this of January of this year, and that's been really great to create a community. That's how we met, Maya, and I met a lot of other women who have been struggling to work through the feelings of loneliness, of post-divorce, before even getting married. And so continuing that community that I was already building has been really helpful. And so my Substack, where I've been documenting my growth process throughout this year, has been really helpful. But yeah, when I don't feel like writing, I try to surround myself with good friends, and good food. And when I'm really on top of it, I'll like get into dhikr mode and focus in on, the du'as that I've learned for anxiety and sadness. That's really good. That's when I'm like really like remembering what I'm supposed to do, the keys to resolving this deep sadness. But yeah, I also think like, I've read some grief recovery handbooks, And they say like you shouldn't always keep busy so that you're like, pushing off the sadness, like to don't distract yourself that way. But for me, actually having a full plate has been really helpful, especially when I try to fill it with doing good things in the community, being more involved with, pro-Palestinian protest, volunteering at the local shelter, like these things that really help me feel like I have some purpose. That's really been like things that keep me going during the week, from week to week. It's like, okay, what new thing do I have going on? Like, where can I put myself into the community where I feel good energy, good spirits? The different events at the masjid, yeah, different halakas, like in those spaces, I feel like really recharged. And I try to give myself breaks as well. So I'm just like some days I'm like in the bed for mo the majority of the day, and that's fine because then the next day I get up and I'm able to recharge and be with people, and that really helps me as well.
Hmm. Yeah, for me, I feel that if I see it approaching like a storm that's coming, I can like almost like, okay, we need a strategy. Let's do something about this. But when it's too late and it just hits you and you are swimming and sinking in it, for me at least, it's really, really, really tough. Like as you mentioned, there are some days when you just are in bed and that's it. And you just have to ride it through, until it comes out, until you come out on the other side. How about you, Lama?
Yeah, I think what you said something, Nyla, about that kind of keeping busy. And I think Salma, you mentioned something about giving yourself permission. And I really just reflecting that that's exactly what I did when I first got divorced. Um similar to you, Salma, I chose to leave the marriage. It was my decision, initiated it, and I just carried on working throughout. I didn't take any time off work, and similarly, when my mum died, I just carried on with life. And I think it's interesting now how like how many years down the line, I'm really only this past year, I would say, past year or two, where I've really felt the grief. Because
Mm.
I've moved jobs. I've taken a job which is a bit less stressful. So I'm not constantly busy. I've actually, personal circumstances have meant that I've had more time essentially to grieve. And in some ways, as I mentioned earlier, it's extremely painful, but it's actually feels really good to be able to actually process things. And like I find that but it is waves, like it just comes. Like I can't quite see it coming, in all honesty. And for me, there's always a bit of an underlying grief. I'm just it's a constant. Like it just feels like it's always there. I think with grief, you never really everyone goes through different types of loss, but you never really get over it. So you get through it and you deal with it, but you never get over that because it changes you, it shapes you. So I think for me, the way I deal with it is I just am really trying to learn to actually let it out. So let my feelings out. Crying, I cry a lot. And yeah, so anytime I just feel like, I miss my mum or I miss this, I let it out. And I'm just really trying to just do things that make me feel fulfilled. So, I'm studying, alhamdulillah, an Islamic course, and that's really given me a purpose in life. And, so I'm busy with kids anyway, but, just doing things that make me feel fulfilled so that I don't feel empty and I don't feel like, um, the grief will just swallow me, basically, when it comes.
Yeah.
Do you have optimism that this grief will pass eventually? I'm
Uh,
asking this question because when you are speaking, the way that you have expressed yourself, it's almost as if you are saying that this is how it's going to be.
I think so. It's difficult, I think, because when I think of grief, in all honesty, I think of the loss of my mum. So I know that I've grieved a divorce, but I feel like I'm I've processed that. I'm kind of managing. I've managed that. That's kind of, but when I'm grieving the loss of my mum, when you're with death, it's that's it. Like you're not, I don't know, it's a bit of a different type of grief. That it's not that I don't have optimism. For me, the optimism is that I'm going to meet her, I'm going to be reunited with her. The optimism is that I know that she's in a better place, inshallah. You know, that's there is a hope there, but it's a different type of hope. It's not that for me, I actually don't ever want to get over that grief because she's such a special person to me. I love her, you know, I love to talk about her. I don't ever want to get over her, if that makes sense.
I'm curious.
And
I'm
yeah.
curious to ask Salma, what do you think about that? Being somebody who's your grief coach, what do you think about what Lama said that she actually doesn't want to let go of that grief? She's in somehow attached. I'm just curious to know your opinion about that.
I was just actually thinking when Lama was speaking, and I think for the way I see it is it's grieving, it has such a negative sort of definition. Like when we think of somebody who's grief stricken, we're thinking it's somebody that's, you know, devastated, crying, etc. But I think the grief that Lama's talking about, what I'm hearing from her words, is actually it's not that you're letting go of the grief. You don't want to let go of the memories that you have of your mother. And they're not quite the same thing from the way I'm hearing it. And what happens with our emotions like grief, like the upset, the anger, all of the things that come within the grief cycle is actually we don't ever forget because as human beings, those memories are always going to be there. We don't just delete them when we, you know, there is no end to the grieving period. What actually happens is that those memories get easier to think back to. So, if you think back to very early on, every time we think about somebody that we've lost or a situation that happened, it evokes a physical, mental sort of reaction from us. But as time goes on and we process that grief and we realize that actually we can think back, you can probably think about your mother and think more about the lovely memories that you have, the support that you have, and that never goes away. She's always going to be there, part of your life. It's somebody that was there for your whole entire life. That's never going to change. So I think it's really about sometimes for me, I do a lot of work around actually rephrasing what it is that I don't want to let go of. So, it's the memories that you don't want to let go of. If we continue in a state of grief, that doesn't necessarily mean that we are still hurting. We do hurt, obviously, but the length of time that we're hurting starts getting smaller. And how we manage those thoughts and those feelings as time goes on gets shorter and shorter. And it doesn't evoke that kind of violent reaction that we may have when we're really early on in the grief. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. So it's like the quality of grief almost softens. It's a softer grief,
Yeah.
and that one might look back and think fondly with a bit of
Mm.
sadness of the good times
Yeah.
and with a sense of gratitude rather
Yes.
than like, woe is me, this is absolutely terrible. I cannot handle my situation. Life is so hard. But it's more like a wave of sadness with
Yes.
you for the good times that we had, right?
Yeah. I think the emotions get easier to manage. They're always still there. They just don't take us down at that moment in time.
Mhm. Salma, how about you? How do you handle your grief?
Oh, how do I handle my grief? I think when Nyla was talking and she was talking about spending the day on the duvet, there was a time when that for me was a failure. If I got up in the morning and I could not face going to the office. And I was quite lucky in that sense that I had quite a supportive manager. I had been working with that company at that time for quite a few years, so I had a good relationship. He knew my ex-husband, so we had a social life outside of work as a team. And so there would be days where I would wake up and I'd ring him and I'd say, I just cannot face coming to the office today. And he'd be like, okay, that's fine. But to me, that was a real failure. Why can't you get out of bed? And I still have days now where my body needs to rest. Life is, as a single parent, working parent, it is very tough. And there are days where I think to myself, I'm just not feeling great. I'm not in the right place. I just need to rest. And now when I'm working from home, hopefully my manager's not listening to this podcast, for my lunch break, I'll think actually my body's saying to me, you need to lie down for a little while. And I now gift myself that time. So in I do a lot of work around changing the words, the internals that I'm speaking to myself, because I think that's the most powerful tool we have. Is it's not necessarily what your therapist is saying to you. It's not necessarily what your best friend or your sister or your partner is saying to you. It's actually the words that are going on inside of you that have the biggest impact on how we're feeling. And if we can work on reducing the negative noise in our head, then we can start helping ourselves, because your therapist is not always there, your parents are not always there, and sometimes you're not even able to put into words when that grief comes around. It's really hard to explain this, especially I've been divorced 10 years, and sometimes it does come back. You think about what it could have been, what you could have done differently, what how things could have been different. But then I do a lot of work around, okay, maybe I do need to just take some time out and look at what's going on in my own head and change that. So I do a lot of work of, I'm sure sometimes I'm walking down the high street and I'll be just speaking out loud to myself. And, living in London, that's not so abnormal. Lots of people talk to themselves in London. But for me, it's a form of self-therapy and self-coaching to say, right, okay, come on, tell me what's going on for you. What is it that's making you anxious? What is it? It could be something, the grief now for me comes sometimes for not so much the loss of my marriage, but the loss that I feel that my children feel. Because for me, even at this age, I'm in my 50s now, and Alhamdulillah, the first person, when something goes wrong in my life, the first person that I pick the phone up to think is my dad. And he's in his 70s, probably unlikely to help me if I've, got a major problem. He's not going to. But that comfort is there, and I feel a lot of grief around the fact that actually my children don't have that. They have other people to fall on. And maybe if you've never experienced something, you don't miss it because you don't know what you're missing because you've never had it. So I've never had these conversations with them, but I sometimes grieve what I feel is missing from their life. And then I have to have that conversation with myself and say, well, they're happy, well-rounded, confident children. So why are you looking into something that actually they're not complaining about? So yeah, I do a lot of self-talk.
What I love is that it sounds that grief doesn't have a yoke around your neck. It sounds like you really have reached a point where you are able to control the grief. It doesn't
Yes.
control you. Yeah. And
Yeah. And I think that's the journey that you have to take. It's not linear. There's no like, right, I've reached this stage now, I'm fixed. I've
Mm,
reached this phase now, I'm fixed a bit more. And that's a word that I really don't like, because we never fix ourselves, and we should
mhm,
never be trying to fix ourselves. What should we trying to do is to look at what's not working for us and look at better ways to do them.
mhm. If you have any tips about how does one reach that point? And I'm asking this because sometimes you meet people I'm sure you've come across these people who have whose husband cheated on them 15 years ago and they're still lamenting about what he did, or this happened 20 years ago and they're still going on about it. And it's almost as if they are still so entrenched in it, and they somewhat, in a way, there's some payback, like they have some enjoyment, or maybe they just don't know how to do it any other way. So,
Yeah.
but then at the
Yeah.
same time, people also say that you can't put a date. You can't say, okay, well, in 6 months, I am going to be over this, and that is my goal, because it's such a, yeah.
No, there is no timeline on processing our emotions. However, it has to be, we have to make a conscious effort to try and get there. I think what often happens is people get stuck in that state. And so, in some ways, and this is, not to say that people enjoy being the victim, but we know it's familiar. So we know that actually to move on from here, we're going to have to do some work. We're going to have to look beyond what's happened. And we might even have to make some very scary decisions in the process. And that's what people tend to shy away from. So it's easier to stay stuck in that, you're the victim, you've been wronged, it's your husband cheated. Now, yes, but that's happened. And yes, we need time to grieve that, and we need time to, nurse our wounds, and we definitely need to, spend a little bit of time, however we manage our grief at that time. But at some point, you either make a conscious decision that actually, how long am I going to allow something that happened 5, 10, 15 years ago keep me stuck? Because every time we, you probably, all of you ladies have probably experienced this, is when, something upsetting has happened or something even good has happened, and we think back to that event and we may start crying because suddenly you're back in that place. Because as far as your mind is concerned, you are reliving that moment. So every time you relive those memories, every time you make a conscious effort to go over a traumatic conversation or an abusive conversation, your body thinks that you are in that moment. And every time you're doing that, the damage that you're doing to yourself physically and mentally, in terms of the stress that you're under, you're doing that to yourself over and over again. And we all know what stress does to our bodies. So we have to make these like conscious decisions to think, like one of the things I had to do straight after my divorce, I used to drive to work, and I used to spend the whole journey home, because once I get home, there was no time to think because my children were quite young. But I would spend that 40 minutes reliving conversations over and over and over again. And they were no different to the day before or the day before that. And once I became, and I did that probably for about a year. So by the time I got home, even though I'd had a fairly good day at work, by the time I got home, I was in a state of depression because, I was thinking, oh my God, I can't believe I put up with that. I can't believe he said that. Oh, I should have said that. Oh, I wish I'd done this. And all of these things that are actually no longer possible because it's happened. So I had to start making a conscious effort to think, right, how do I stop myself spending every day, twice a day, the journey to work and the journey back, not going over these conversations because they're not helping me. And, I had to find ways to like, okay, right, I'm going to put a podcast on. I'm going to listen to something, or I'm going to put, listen to the duas or, something, just to get my mind away from this habit that I had got into of going over and over the past.
Right. And the more you do it, the more it becomes
Yeah.
a habit, the more you are creating these neural pathways in the brain.
And the more you remind yourself, like, if you make a conscious effort, you think, right, it's not that it's not going to happen. But as soon as you start going down that road,
Yeah.
you're like, stop right now.
Yeah, I've
Right?
got a friend who actually had to keep, she keeps like a rubber band around her wrist, and then every time
Yeah.
she catches herself, she'll literally snap it to like, stop it, stop it.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
sometimes we do this because we also, I know I do, I have a very vivid imagination, and it's as if it really is coming to life. And
Yeah.
then it's such a reality check when you might bump into that person with whom your grief is associated with, and they have totally moved on.
Yeah.
It's like, not even a thing. And then you realize, oh my God, like which planet am I on? Like, am I so stuck in the past when this person has completely moved on with his or her life? And and then I think this is why it's so important to, I would recommend to really visualize how
Yeah.
could you be. And there's certain meditations that I do that I find particularly helpful if I'm in a low space, that it's like, how would it look like? How would it feel like if you had, for
Mm.
example, all of your needs met? If you were in a state of abundance, if you felt
Yeah.
loved or you were loving, how would it feel to be inspired? How would it feel? And to actually like create a different movie about
Yeah.
where you want to be. Sometimes I think in those visions of myself, maybe like 20 years from now, like all gray hair and, like an older person. And, because do we want to be somebody who's still, carrying such like heavy emotions for all
Yeah.
these years to come? Like, I think that in itself, just that alone, like just thinking, am I going to be like this forever, is in itself grief causing, because it's
Yes.
this feeling of like despair.
Yeah.
Like, is this what I'm going to be feeling my whole life? Like that's
Mm.
in a way, it's a way in a way suffocating. It's
Yeah.
like we all want to be light and to release that and to also be open to receiving more aspects of joy into our lives. Because if we're in such a dark place, then sometimes it's very hard to be receptive to light, you
Yeah.
know. But then
Yeah.
somebody,
We have to actively look for those moments
Mhm.
and appreciate those moments, because I think when we're stuck in grief, like you said, everything feels very dark. And we forget that even when life is really hard, there is still a lot that we have to be grateful for. That, and then we don't we stop noticing those things, so everything just feels really heavy and dark. So even if we can spend a few minutes a day just thinking, right, I know life is really hard right now, I know I feel like I'm carrying 100 tons on my shoulders, but there's got to be something good that's happened today. The
Mhm.
fact that your child smiled at you, or and the sun is out. I mean, I started making a conscious effort on my, to listen out for the birds, because I think there was a period of time where I didn't hear the birds sing. And it's so easy. You just have to step outside your front door, you
Mhm.
know, at least if you live near a park or somewhere. So it's these tiny, tiny things that if we can start being a bit more conscious, because I think grief takes us into almost like a zombie state. And we have to make that effort to bring ourselves out of that zombie state, because if we don't try, we could stay in that state for very, very long periods of time.
And I know Nyla mentioned friends. That's important because when we are so melancholic, sometimes you need somebody who's more sanguine, who can come up and
Mm.
say, "Look at the sun, look at the flowers, they are in bloom." Because sometimes these things are oblivious to us.
Yeah,
So
we've stopped
have
looking
that
for them.
person, yeah, to just take you out of your head and to say, breathe and just be here with life. And life is beautiful, because I think in the depths of grief, life can seem to be a very constricted space, uh,
Yeah.
you know.
Like you said, that can feel very suffocating.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So I would assume that all three of you are from different cultural backgrounds. I'm curious to know that, do you think that cultural or societal norms have affected your process of grieving, whether it's positively or negatively? If anyone has something to say about that.
I think in terms of the divorce, I was quite lucky in the sense that my parents um, were very much um, in support of the divorce. Um, so from that perspective, I think they were very understanding in the few years afterwards that I was in a very, very bad place. Um, so I think from my perspective, I think for me, grief is quite a universal um, emotion, regardless of religion, regardless of what your cultural background is. It's a pain that everybody, unfortunately is going to feel at some point during their lives. But I think what is can be different is the support that you receive from the people around you. that could potentially, be impacted on how much support you have in terms of, I think there's a difference in terms of the support that you might receive when you lose somebody through death, because I think we all generally have empathy towards that. And, we feel the other person's pain because maybe we've all experienced that at some point in time. I think sometimes the support can be different when we're grieving a divorce, depending on the cultural sort of biases that we have in that society. It's almost like, it's not the same thing. Yeah, okay, we grieve somebody that's passed away because we're never going to see them again. But we don't always see divorce as an opportunity to grieve. So I think that could be different depending on, the people that you're surrounded by and what their ideas, beliefs, cultural, whatever they've, taken from the religion. Because I don't think that, especially from my research, is that I don't think that that Islam, in terms of divorce, is restrictive. I think the cultural idea of divorce is very different to actually, if we go back to the teachings of our religion, is completely different.
Absolutely. Nyla, Lama?
Yeah, just in terms of the divorce, I there was a lot of alhamdulillah, like so my dad has been a real strong support throughout. So from before then and up until now, alhamdulillah. But in terms of the extended family, there was a few kind of, well, there's quite a lot of difficult kind of interactions with the extended family, things in sense of like putting shame on the family, things like that. And it was a very tricky time for anyone, but it did feel like my needs weren't being heard and my kind of
Mm.
personhood wasn't being heard. So that was quite a challenge. And it did lead to me having to take time away kind of from communicating with certain members of the family. Alhamdulillah, like it did take time for me to kind of deal with that, and kind of that was an added level of grief because I was also living in that uh, part of the world for a while when I was married. So and then I kind of moved back to the UK. But yeah, it was kind of like a challenge. And then when I was just reflecting on the grief of my mother, um, there was some. It was tricky because it was seen as so obviously we have a 3 day kind of mourning period in Islam where, in that within that 3 days you have family over, you have people come and say the condolences. My mum was unwell for a relatively short period of time, but she was unwell, so we knew it was an expected death. However, there were people in the family that were kind of expecting, particularly my dad, like after the 3 days, it's like, that's it, someone actually said to him, "What, you should think about getting married again." It's like my parents were together for 30 years. They got married when my mum was 19, so, and this isn't something that I feel should have been said at all. It's not something you should, even if you think it, you shouldn't say that. And it was, thing that was a bit of a difficult time because also giving my dad time to grieve, but also, after the 3 days, you're expected to go back to normal life. And actually, that's just not the way it is with when you lose someone very close to you. So, yeah, that was a bit of a challenge.
Mm.
Yeah, for me, my family was really supportive when my ex decided to leave the marriage in really quick way. So they really came quick to my defense and trying to seek answers. My dad and my stepmom came to stay with me for 2 weeks in my apartment, and like people fed me, took care of me, just were really great. But as I moved through the year, still carried around the like a lot of sadness, and I was very like open about it. Like people ask me how I'm doing. I'm alive. Alhamdulillah. Like I'm here. Like, but that's all I could give them for several months. And after a while, they started to be like, well, you got to move on. It's more, you're more than alive. Like in creating a false sense of like positivity that I didn't have. Even yeah, people that were like closest circles within the family were just like, not able to continue doing the kind of gymnastics analysis that I was trying to do out loud with them of like, well, maybe, he left because of this reason or did this, or this problem, spiraled because of whatever. And it was just like you like stop talking about it. Like you got to move on, all these kind of things that weren't helpful. And I realized that it's because other people, they can't deal with the grief
Mm.
themselves. Like they felt really bad for my situation. They felt heartbroken themselves. And their way of processing it is to pretend like it's over, it didn't happen, or that there's no more bad feelings because it's just easier for them. So now I've learned to like respect like where they're at. Like they're not able to process those things with me, so I'm not going to process with them anymore. And if I do need to pretend like I'm having a good day to make them feel better, sometimes I'm going to do that. We don't live in the same state, so it's easier, like, to pick up a phone and pretend like it's a good day, because that's what they need, and I'm okay with doing that to maintain my family relationships. But yeah, it was really a hard thing to learn that, like, that people, you're not able to like express your feelings with everyone, because they got a time limit for grief for themselves that's different than my time limit. I'm
Mm.
okay with sitting with it. And some people aren't, they can't deal with sadness.
I've come across some family members where they just don't want to deal with it at all. So it becomes like just you, like you said, Nyla, you cannot really even you can't be open and honest with these certain people. But it does, I don't know if you feel the same, but it then makes you reevaluate your relationships in life around you. I certainly ended up having much more of a smaller circle in terms of who I let in. Um, Not even to let in, but actually who I value to be around me and actually spend time with and have kind of deeper conversations. I think with the grief, it's really made me more of a I can't deal with small talk and like um that I know there's a place for it, obviously, but actually, I really value deeper relationships and relationships that are more meaningful and conversations that are more meaningful. And I think that the grieving definitely that was just part of it for me in terms of like that's what I'm choosing more, taking more being more intentional with the people I have around me.
Yeah. And I think sometimes that's what people, sometimes the best support is just somebody just being able to just be there for you. And, because I think you do go through a period when you're grieving where you may be repeating the same thing over and over again, or because you're trying to make sense of your realities. And there's, often, especially in a divorce, there's so many unanswered questions that you're probably never going to have the answers to. But during that time, you are looking for the answers. So you need to be able to have at least somebody within your circle that is just okay with letting you offload, because when you're verbalizing something, you're actually trying to make sense of all the jumbled up stuff that's going on in your head. And if you don't offload it either through writing or through speaking, it just stays really jumbled up in your head, and you just get more and more overwhelmed, and life gets more and more chaotic, and you just have more and more questions. And so attempting to answer those questions is by discussing that with people. And I think, you're absolutely right, Nyla and Lama, that sometimes there's very few people in our inner circle that are able to provide us with that platform and with that safety net where you can really just, often say, I was quite lucky in the sense of I've got three sisters. And I used to sometimes think to myself, oh my God, they must be so sick of my sad story because every time we get together, I just moan about the same things. And they used to just say to me, listen, we're not sick of your sad story. It's fine. And, because you need to be able to verbalize in order to make sense of your emotions. And so if you look, and again, it has to be somebody that you trust, somebody that's not going to be, you know, taking your, as I say, sad story out to the rest of the world. So if you have somebody in your life that, you know, maybe doesn't even, maybe on some days you're not even speaking, you're just sitting with them and you're feeling that warmth and that understanding and that empathy, hold on to them because they should be in your life.
Yeah, those are very special people because
Yeah.
family is going to love you regardless.
Yes.
Sometimes I think, man, I don't want to burden my friends. It's not easy for people to keep hearing pain and suffering.
Yeah.
It's painful for them, you know. And so if you have somebody who is able to hold space for you, act as a sounding board, who is compassionate, I mean, that's precious. That's
And I
precious.
think sometimes we have to even, because I have one sister who's a solution orientated person. And so when you tell her a problem, she'll start providing with solutions. And I remember saying to her once, but I don't want your solutions. I just want you to listen. And she really took that on board. And I said, right now, there are no quick solutions. And I said, but every time I talk to you, you'd say, oh, but why don't you do this or why don't you do that? And not there yet. And so sometimes I think the people around us, they're just trying to help us fix things. They just want to take our pain away. They want to they want to see us happy again. They want to see us laughing. They want us to be the friend that they had before, this happened. And they want to get back there quickly. So sometimes we ourselves have to tell our friends what we need from them. And if that means that you just say to them, I don't want you to say anything. I just want you to sit with me, or I just want you to listen and not offer me any solutions because right now I'm not looking for solutions. I'm not there yet. So I think sometimes people just don't know how to react. So if we need something from them, it's also our responsibility to sometimes at least give them the opportunity to try and give us what we need.
I think that's excellent advice because people aren't mind readers, and it's
Yeah,
also enabling us to be better communicators that this is my need. Are you able to meet my need?
yeah,
You either say yay or nay,
yeah.
so it's useful. Ladies, I'd like to talk a bit about transformation. What has grief taught you about resilience, compassion, love, and also how has it reshaped your priorities in life?
I think for me, grief has taught me a very important lesson, and I've often reflected on this. I was a very goal-orientated person. From a very young age, I had a list, go to university, do my master's, get married, have children, work for this company, work for that company. And it was very much a tick, 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 tick. And then suddenly things that were not on my tick list happened. And then there was quite a long, probably about a decade, where I felt like I wasn't going anywhere. My life had not moved forward in any of the goals that I had. And I think for me, it helped me realize that actually that tick list was never me. That tick list was God's plan for me. And I was on this trajectory of, right, now I got to get to university. Now I got to finish my master's. And none of that would have been possible if he didn't have it planned for me. So again, whatever happened in that decade was his plan for me. And I think that's been the most sobering realization that I had. That prior to that, I think I had the idea that everything that I was achieving in life, I was doing it through my own sheer hard work and my, you know, my sort of, you know, I was on this. I still am a very goal orientated person. I do set myself goals and think, right, I need to be here. Now, this is what I want to achieve. But now I have more of a humbleness about it that actually, you know, this is where I'd like to be, but it can only happen if God has his own plans. Doesn't matter what I'm planning, doesn't matter what's on my list of, goals or achievements. So I think for me, it's made me more humble.
And surrender. I'm hearing you just say surrender.
Yeah. Yep.
I think for me, this is going to sound quite strange, but the grief has been the experiences of grief have actually been the best things that have happened to me in my life.
Mm.
And because of the what I've what how my life has progressed because of it. And in all honesty, the way my relationship with Allah has just grown, and it's grief can be so for me it made my faith very shaky. I was quite shaky when I was going through my divorce, and when I lost my mum, but particularly when I was going through my divorce, it was quite hard to hold on to Allah throughout that. But subhanAllah, like I feel like looking back now, I can really see how I he knows what's best for us. Like I
Yeah.
needed to go through those extreme like periods of pain to get to where I am now, and actually, really feel that kind of that transformation in my life, and really understand who I am as a person, um, who what Allah wants for me as a woman, and yeah, alhamdulillah, like it's a real test, but it's actually there's so much good that's come out of it, and you know how um Allah takes only to give you something better, and really it's looking for those things, what's better. And alhamdulillah, like I'm so grateful for where I am in my life right now. You know, and it does build resilience in you in the sense of like when you've gone through depths of, deep, quite despair, what the bottom looks like. So, it's like you can only really rise after that. And alhamdulillah for the experiences that are mean that we are able to rise and really get to where Allah wants us to at the end of the day. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd agree with both of what you guys are saying. In terms of like, no more planning, thinking that your plans are the best because it's only Allah's plans, and then the inner strength, resilience. Is definitely like a repeating lesson I've learned. And then for me, I guess like I placed a lot of value on people. I did grow up in a family that was a little unstable for some years, with my parents going through their own divorce, and alhamdulillah, they later remarried, but not until I was out of the house. So continuing to search for family and stability, and then having that like really uprooted very suddenly for me. Did feel like that Allah was trying to tell me like you have to, at the end of the day, just learn to be by yourself, and create your own, the chosen family kind of thing. But that community that I have developed from that has been really invigorating. And I think that, yeah, sometimes Allah's not going to give you what you want, but he'll give you what you need. And so I think, I'm still learning about all of the blessings from the grief process, but I do see the lessons of like, learning to be on my own and that I can do it because there were a lot of days in the beginning of this last year where I felt like I was gonna die because I couldn't find that strength. Like I didn't understand like how I was going to pick myself up again. But I did month after month and continues to get better and find new peace and different layers of this grief onion that continues to like peel back. So alhamdulillah for that.
Thank you. For me, I think that grief has taught me that pain is an inevitable part of life
Mm.
and that it will happen again. So that enjoy, love, but also don't be too attached because loss is an inevitable part of life. And I mean, something as simple, for example, with my child, right? So I try to savor the good moments, but I see it as being a season, like I know that the age where my child is receptive to cuddles and communication and eye contact probably has a time limit. And there might
It
come a
absolutely
when,
does.
yes, and I'll probably be then begging my child at some point to spend time with me. And this is what I hear. I keep hearing from other mothers about the terrible teenage years. So I have to, in a way, try to exercise, which is difficult, some kind of detachment, you know? And I don't know if that's a good or bad thing, because maybe it's maybe a self-protective mechanism, but it's knowing that like I know what grief is and oh God, don't give it to me again. But it's probably going to happen at some point because people will die, and loved ones will leave us. Betrayal happens. All of those things happen, and this is what has been stated from all of you that that's the nature of the dunya. The dunya is something that will let you down, you know.
Yeah.
So
I would say I got a message from someone who was recently divorced. Like she was married for several years and like trying to have kids, like went through the IVF process and was not able to be successful. And then, that ended up getting a divorce. She was like in her mid 40s and she was just like didn't have any hope for like next steps of like meeting someone else or like finding something else that she was passionate about. She literally told me that she was counting her death days and that her days till death because she just felt like that was it. And my message to her and to other people was like, no, that can't be. Like your one purpose cannot be to enter into a marriage or to have children. Like there's so many layers to Allah's purpose for you to be alive on this earth, and you can't limit yourself. He's given you the gift of life, and you have to search to figure out what that gift is for, like what your separate purpose other than worshiping him, like what else you can do with your time that's productive, because that cannot be the only one solution. And for me, when it was in my darkest days, I was just like, this can't be the end. Like this is not the end of my story. It feels like it. It feels like it's like really I'm pushing through mud to get to solid ground, but it just can't be the end. And if you're not like fighting to save yourself like from those dark thoughts, like you need to get help from someone else to like help you pull you out, because it just can't, like that can't be the end for you, is this one marriage, this one person, this one idea. There's just too many other possibilities to your story.
I think we refer to it as the end of that chapter, not the end of the book. So
Right.
you can, once you've closed that chapter, you can go on to start the next chapter. Because if we actually look about the journey of life, we close lots of chapters, we close, but we don't have such an attachment to them as we do. Like, even like, we finish primary school, we close that chapter, we move on to the next stage of our life, and we move on to the next stage of our life. We, go off to university, or, if you're away from home. These are all little chapters that make up the book of our life. So, but we don't you know, finish one chapter, whether it's a job or a degree or a friendship. There may be many friendships that we've ended during our lifetime. People have moved on, or you've just fallen out, or you've just drifted apart. They're no longer. So we have to see even divorce as just the end of that chapter. And there's a new chapter that you can start writing. And then that chapter, you can, like you said, find your purpose, make it whatever you want it to be. And I think once we are able to close that chapter, that's the most important thing. Close that chapter so that you can move on to start your new chapter. Don't leave that chapter open so it kind of almost like filters into your new chapter.
Any other words of advice to ladies out there who are experiencing grief right now?
Hold on to those around you that give you the space and the air, being with people that are you're able to express your feelings with, that support you, that you are also able to tell them what you need and they're receptive to that. But also in terms of those that are maybe coming across those that are grieving, so for me personally, I love it when people ask me about my mum. Like it can be quite a difficult um topic to, I think, in society. We don't, when someone dies, and if you've maybe not personally gone through the experience, it can be quite a difficult thing to um kind of broach that subject. But actually it means so much to me when someone says, asks me about my mom. They might not know her at all, they just know me, and giving me that space to be able to talk about her, letting me get upset if I feel like the emotions are coming. And yeah, and those that are maybe know her, when they tell me things about her, it just makes me really happy. And like, obviously then making dua out for her as well is so important. But yeah, just giving people I think also asking people what they need in that period of time, like what do you need? And maybe not even asking them, sorry, I'm like going around and like just doing things for people, like making the food for them and like just dropping it off and like doing the practical things so that they don't have to worry about, um they don't even have to think about those practical, taking kids to school if they've got kids, or things like that that can just be of massive help. And there's many people, including myself, that don't always ask for help. So yeah, having people around you that can just step in, when and know what you need.
Yeah. I think there's so much advice you could give, but I think I'm thinking largely from a lot of the people that reach out to me. I think my advice would be that there's always options. We are never, sometimes we can feel really stuck in a situation and we feel like, well, this is it. This is my life. This is how I'm always going to be. And what I would say to those people is that there are always options. We just have to be brave enough to look for them. And that doesn't, it's what I say to a lot of clients that come out to me very early on. That doesn't always mean that I'm referring to divorce. No, it doesn't. But sometimes the options may be that we need to look at what is going wrong at this moment in time and can we do something to change the situation, but not to stay stuck in a situation that's hurting us and not serving us. If you can't see those options, then reach out to somebody that can help you see those options, whether it's a best friend, whether it's your parents. Don't feel that it's going to be silly for you to talk about what you're feeling, because there'll always be somebody that's willing to listen. I'm not necessarily saying it's everybody, but there is somebody that will be willing to provide you that platform to work out what your options are and where you go from here.
Thank you, everyone, for sharing so vulnerably about your own situations. And I pray that Allah grants you tawfiq, divine success. And I know that what you've said will be of tremendous benefit to other ladies out there. So thank you so much. May Allah reward you.